They only came in for a bottle of water, but found themselves in the middle of a robbery. The fake cop threatened the cashier and pointed a gun right at them until he realized who was in front of him. Subscribe to the channel and post in the comments where you're watching this video from. The city slept under a blanket of low clouds and the pale shimmer of distant streetlights. Midnight had passed an hour ago, and the streets of the industrial district lay deserted, save for the occasional flicker of motion, a scuttling alley cat, the slow blink of a faulty neon sign, a lazy drift of mist from a nearby rooftop vent. It was the kind of night that breathed stillness, heavy with the hush of a world momentarily paused. Inside a black SUV, its paint dulled slightly by dust and time, two figures sat in silence as the vehicle rolled down a dimly lit avenue. Chuck Norris drove with a hand resting loosely on the wheel, the other resting across his lap. His gaze was steady but not sharp, the kind of quiet awareness that came with age and experience. He didn't need to look around to know what was happening outside. He felt the rhythm of the city in its absence of sound. Beside him, Ronda Rousey stretched her neck with a quiet sigh, the leather of the seat creaking softly beneath her. They had just wrapped a long evening at a self-defense seminar hosted at a local women's shelter. What was supposed to be a 2-hour appearance had become an all-night session. Questions, training, encouragement. It wasn't the kind of work that tired the body so much as the soul. There had been stories tonight, too many of them, of pain and survival. Chuck had spoken little. He never did. His presence alone seemed to ground the room. Ronda, on the other hand, had led most of the physical demonstrations. Now exhaustion clung to her like a second skin, and her stomach grumbled audibly. "Think we'll pass a diner?" she muttered, rubbing her shoulder. "I could eat the dashboard." Chuck's lips curved into a slight smile. "Doubt anything decent's still open." A faint blue glow caught his eye ahead. A flickering neon sign, suspended over a weather-beaten corner store, pulsed the word "open" into the darkness with mechanical persistence. The building was narrow and crumbling, but its front lights were on, and a cracked security camera perched above the entrance like a lazy hawk. Ronda tilted her head. "That'll do." Chuck slowed the vehicle and eased into the small parking area in front of the shop. The lot was empty, save for a gray, mud-splattered sedan parked haphazardly across two spaces. No plates on the front. No parking sticker. Chuck gave it a cursory glance, then killed the engine. The two exited the vehicle almost in unison, their movements unhurried but fluid. As they stepped into the chilly night air, Ronda zipped her hoodie while Chuck adjusted the collar of his jacket. The flickering streetlight above them gave their shadows a strange, stuttering gait as they crossed to the store. Inside, the buzz of fluorescent lighting washed over them like a faint hiss. The air was stale with the scent of floor cleaner and burnt coffee. Somewhere in the back, a ceiling vent rattled quietly. Shelves lined with snacks, canned food, and drinks stood in mostly neat order, though one display of discounted soda leaned awkwardly to one side. At the register stood a young woman, early 20s perhaps, her skin a rich dark tone that caught the light in warm undertones despite the fatigue that hung from her shoulders. She wore a navy blue sweatshirt with sleeves pushed to her elbows, and her name tag, only partially visible, read Ebony. Her eyes were puffy, and dark circles sat beneath them like bruises from too many sleepless nights. A single earbud dangled from one ear, though the music had long since stopped. Chuck noticed immediately that something was off. Not just the girl's demeanor, though she looked like someone teetering on the edge, but the atmosphere of the store itself. It was too quiet, too watchful. His eyes shifted subtly. Near the counter, Leaning against the lottery display stood a man. His posture was casual, but only just. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with pale skin that looked too clean under the store's flickering lights. He wore a police uniform, or at least something resembling one. The stitching on the shoulder patches was uneven, and the badge on his chest had no reflection, no shine. His hands rested on his hips, fingers close to the bulky utility belt that hung too low on his waist. He was watching Ebony. Not in the way a customer might wait to be helped, but with an air of ownership, of entitlement. There was something predatory in the way he smiled when she looked down to avoid eye contact. Ronda tensed. She wasn't facing the man directly, but she'd felt that look before, in locker rooms, gyms, and media events when men thought they could test her boundaries. Her instincts flared. She reached out and tapped Chuck's arm lightly. He'd already noticed. They moved slowly through the aisles, heading toward the drink cooler at the back of the store. Chuck walked with a relaxed gait, but his eyes stayed on the mirror behind the register, catching fragmented glimpses of the man in uniform. Ronda scanned the shelves as if browsing, her peripheral vision wide open. "I told you last week," the man said suddenly, his voice cutting through the stillness like a razor. "You keep this attitude, it's going to be a problem." Ebony flinched but didn't look up. Her voice was low. "I'm just doing my job, sir." "Sir," the man echoed mockingly. "That's more like it." Chuck felt his jaw tighten. He reached into the cooler and grabbed 2 bottles of water, then nodded toward the aisle that led to the front. As they approached the counter, the man turned to them. "Evening," he said, voice smooth. His smile was thin, forced. "Just making sure everything's secure here." Chuck said nothing at first. He met the man's eyes briefly, then looked to Ebony. She was pale now, her hands moving with jerky precision as she rang up a sale for another customer who had just approached the counter, a tired-looking woman buying diapers and milk. The customer cast a nervous glance at the man in uniform, then took her change and left quickly, not even waiting for her receipt. "Appreciate the service," Chuck finally said, placing the bottles on the counter. The man nodded. "Just doing my part, keeping people safe." Ronda's voice was calm but cool. "Nice badge. New?" The man's face didn't move. "Department issued." "Which one?" Chuck asked casually. "Metro Division." His reply was instant, rehearsed. Ronda looked him over again. The stitching on his name tag was slightly off-center. His belt held a flashlight, handcuffs, a radio that wasn't turned on, and a holster with what looked like a sidearm, but the grip was too pristine, too polished. Chuck paid for the water, making a show of taking his time. He could feel the tension in the room thickening like steam. Ebony's hands trembled slightly as she passed him the change. Their fingers brushed. Her skin was cold. They stepped aside, but didn't leave. Instead, they stood near a shelf of trail mix, sipping their drinks in silence, watching. The man returned to his lean against the counter, arms crossed now. "Some folks don't appreciate how much we do," he said, loud enough for Ebony to hear. "Think they can talk back, disrespect the badge, like it's a game." No one answered. Ebony glanced down at her feet. Chuck watched her closely. She was shaking now, but holding it in with desperate strength. Ronda set her bottle down on a nearby shelf. She didn't look at the man, but her body shifted ever so slightly, angling toward the register. Chuck mirrored her. The rhythm of the night had changed. The air felt colder, tighter, like the pause before a thunderclap. Ebony's lips moved, almost imperceptibly. Not a word. A name, maybe. A prayer. Chuck placed the bottle cap back on his drink and screwed it tight. He didn't like what he felt coming, and the night was only beginning. The air inside the store had thickened, not physically but perceptibly, like a shift in pressure before a coming storm. Chuck could feel it in the weight of silence that settled between movements, in the way Ebony's shoulders rose and fell more quickly now, in the rigid stillness of the man who called himself an officer. There were nights when something hung in the air, something dangerous, and Chuck had learned long ago never to ignore that instinct. He stepped back slightly, resting one arm on the shelf behind him as if simply contemplating the price of a protein bar. In truth, he was watching the man near the register from the reflection in the glass door of the cooler. Ronda moved the same way, casual but precise. She leaned over to inspect a rack of gum, her face unreadable, though every muscle in her posture was coiled and ready. The man in the uniform didn't take his eyes off Ebony. He watched her like a hawk watches a rabbit, not because he was hungry, but because he knew she couldn't fly away. There was an ugly familiarity to his posture, the way he shifted his weight just enough to block her space behind the counter without ever touching her. He smiled again, lips thin and humorless. "You know," he said, adjusting his belt slightly, "I've been doing this a long time. I can spot attitude a mile off. And you've got it, girl." Ebony stiffened at the word. Her hands dropped slightly beneath the counter, perhaps toward a button, perhaps simply to hide the tremble in her fingers. She didn't answer. Chuck saw the subtle flick of her eyes toward the side wall, toward the tiny black dome of the security camera mounted high in the corner. It looked old, dusty, a relic from another era. Whether it was recording or not was anyone's guess. "I asked you a question," the man pressed. "Is that how you treat a law enforcement officer, huh?" Ronda straightened. "You okay there?" she asked, loud enough for her voice to carry clearly. Her tone was light, almost friendly, but her eyes were anything but. The man looked over, the false smile returning. "Just handling business. Routine check-in. You know how it is." Chuck spoke then, quiet but firm. "Never seen check-ins done after midnight, especially not by Metro Division." The man's jaw tightened. "You a cop?" "No," Chuck replied, "but I know a few." The man's gaze lingered on him a second longer than necessary, then drifted back to Ebony. "Some people need reminders to stay in line," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Ebony took a small step back. Her elbow brushed against the register's drawer, and the soft clack of plastic hitting metal made the man's hand twitch near his hip. He caught himself, forced a grin, and leaned slightly closer to the counter. "You trying to call someone under the counter?" he asked. "That what you're doing?" "No," Ebony said quickly, her voice cracked. "I was just reaching for coins." "You're jumpy. You got something to hide?" Ronda moved then, slowly walking toward the counter, one hand resting at her side, the other still holding her water bottle. "Seems like you're making her nervous," she said. "Maybe ease up a bit?" The man turned fully toward her now. Up close, his age was clearer, mid-40s perhaps, though his skin looked aged more from stress and sun than from years. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, and his upper lip twitched as if holding back something he couldn't say. "This is official business," he said. "Best you two stay out of it." Chuck stepped forward, only slightly, but enough to make the man glance between them. "You haven't shown a badge," he said. "You haven't given a name. You haven't radioed anything in. That doesn't look like a standard issue sidearm, and your belt's hanging wrong." The man's nostrils flared. "You a uniform inspector now?" "No," Chuck said again, "but I know when someone's wearing a costume." The store fell into silence again, more deafening than any shout could have been. The hum of the refrigeration units seemed louder, more insistent. Ebony barely breathed, her eyes darting between the three of them. Ronda could feel her own pulse behind her ears. The man's hand dropped to his belt again. Chuck didn't miss it. "You want to take a walk?" Chuck asked him, voice low, quiet. "Just you and me." The man laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Nice try, but she needs to answer some questions first." Ebony's voice came out brittle. "I already told you. I don't know what you're talking about. You keep saying I'm under review, but you never said for what. You never even gave me your name." The man's expression turned cold. "Don't talk back." "I have a right," she began, but he slammed his palm on the counter, cutting her off. "You don't have rights when you lie to an officer." Ronda took a sharp step forward, placing herself fully between Ebony and the man. Her eyes were ice now. "That's not how the law works." The man's hand moved fast, too fast. He reached beneath his coat and withdrew the sidearm with a practiced familiarity, leveling it just enough to suggest control, but not enough to trigger immediate reaction. Still, it was a gun, and it was out. "Back off," he said, voice cold as stone. "Both of you." Chuck didn't flinch. Neither did Ronda. They stood there, inches apart, the space between them charged like the air before a lightning strike. Ebony gasped. "Please, don't." "Shut up," the man barked. "All of you. Back. Off." Chuck raised his hands slightly, palms open. "You don't want to do this." "I said shut up." The weapon trembled just enough for Chuck to notice. His eyes narrowed. This man wasn't stable. His anger was covering something, fear, maybe, or desperation. "Why don't you put the gun down?" Ronda said softly. "You've got 2 witnesses, a security camera, and a cashier who's done nothing wrong." The man's laugh returned, harsher this time. "You think that camera's real? You think anyone cares what happens in a place like this? I could walk out right now and no one would lift a finger." "That's where you're wrong," Chuck said. "Someone already has." The words hung in the air like a silent echo. The man's face shifted slightly, confused. "What?" "You've made a mistake," Chuck continued. "You picked the wrong store. You picked the wrong girl. And you definitely picked the wrong night." The man opened his mouth to respond, but his radio, still clipped to his belt, sputtered static. Real static. Then a voice crackled through, unfamiliar and sudden. "Unit 23, do you copy? We've received a report of disturbance at Clarkson Market. Please confirm your position." The man stared at the device, then back at them. For the first time, his expression faltered. Chuck took a step forward. Ronda didn't move, and Ebony, still frozen behind the counter, reached down slowly, her fingers brushing the emergency button beneath the register. The man saw the motion and raised the gun again, higher this time, more deliberate. "Don't you dare!" "Too late," Ronda said. Outside, distant sirens began to wail, and everything changed. The sirens were still distant, faint as whispers in the wind, but their meaning was loud enough to shift the air inside the store. Chuck heard them first, registered the subtle change in the imposter's eyes as recognition dawned. For one brief moment, the man's composure fractured, like glass webbing beneath pressure, and behind his forced authority a crack of panic gleamed through. Then the mask returned. The man jerked the pistol toward Ebony again, though his grip now betrayed the uncertainty in his bones. His knuckles were white, jaw set too tight, and sweat had begun to collect near his temple despite the coolness of the store. His voice came out brittle, louder than before, as if volume could replace conviction. "Back away from the counter," he barked. Now! Chuck didn't move. He took in every twitch, every slight movement of the man's trigger finger. He had seen this look before. Cornered animals trying to act like predators. It was no longer just about control. It was about fear. And fear made people unpredictable. Ronda held her position beside Ebony, shielding her instinctively. Her eyes didn't leave the weapon. Her stance hadn't shifted, but her breathing slowed, her center anchored. She was ready, waiting for the one inevitable mistake. "You heard me," the man snapped again. "Get out from behind the counter, all of you, against the wall." "I'm not moving," Ronda said flatly. "You think this is a joke?" The man's hand twitched, the barrel of the pistol swaying with his rising panic. Chuck's voice came low, quiet, but carved with steel. "Put the gun down before you do something you can't take back." The man glanced toward the door, as if he could see through the metal and glass to where the flashing reds and blues would soon arrive. A muscle in his cheek twitched. "They're not coming for me," he said sharply, more to himself than to them. "They don't even know I'm here." "You sure about that?" Ronda asked, tilting her head. "Because it sounds like they're coming straight for this place. They're just responding to some dumb alarm." His tone cracked under its own weight. "Standard protocol." Chuck watched him carefully. "You've done this before, haven't you?" The man didn't answer. "You've walked into places like this, flashed your fake badge, used your fake authority. You pick stores without night security. You pick women who look like they won't fight back. And you count on nobody looking too closely." Still no answer. But something in the man's posture shifted. He wasn't leaning into the authority anymore. He was leaning into survival. Ronda stepped slightly to the side, her feet never leaving the floor, placing her body even more squarely between the gun and Ebony. "Is that what this is?" she asked. "You thought this would be like the others? Just another scare job?" His eyes narrowed. "You don't know anything about me." "I know cowards," Ronda said, "and I know what they look like when they're about to run. I'm not running." He said it like a vow, but it came out like a whimper. "I'm taking what I came for." "And what is that?" Chuck asked. "Money? Power? Or just someone else's fear?" The gun wavered again. Ebony, still crouched just behind the register, pressed herself back into the shelves behind her. Her lips were moving, silently. Not praying, not pleading, counting. She was counting her breaths. She didn't know why it helped, but it did. 1, 2, 3. The man swung the pistol toward Chuck. "I said against the wall." Chuck raised his hands again, taking a slow step forward. "You're not going to shoot me." "You don't know what I'll do." "I do," Chuck said calmly, "because if you were going to shoot anyone, you would have already. You're not here to kill, you're here to scare." The imposter's hand trembled. "Don't push me." "You already pushed yourself," Chuck replied, "when you put on that uniform, when you stepped in here tonight." "I am the law in this room," the man screamed. "No," Ronda said, stepping forward now, too. "You're just wearing a lie." The door rattled behind them, not the police yet, but the echo of another vehicle parking outside. The man's eyes darted toward it, and in that instant the illusion cracked completely. He looked like what he was, a man who had relied too long on a borrowed symbol of power, who had convinced himself that intimidation was invincibility. His voice dropped into a hiss. "She knows my face. She'll talk." "No," Chuck said, "she'll survive." And that was the breaking point. With a shout, the man reached into his jacket and pulled something else free. A second weapon, this one a folding baton. He flicked it open with a snap and lunged toward Ronda, the pistol still raised but no longer steady. It was a clumsy attack. Ronda sidestepped the baton strike with practiced ease, letting it whistle past her ear. She caught the man's arm just below the elbow, twisted, and slammed the limb down onto the edge of the counter. The gun clattered from his grip, skidding across the floor, spinning to a stop beneath the racks of candy bars. He roared, but Chuck was already moving. In 2 strides, he was behind the man, grabbing his shoulders and yanking him backward. The baton swung wildly, catching a shelf and sending a cascade of energy drinks crashing to the ground. Ronda followed up with a kick to the back of the man's knee. He buckled, fell to one side, and Chuck used his momentum to pin him face down against the grimy floor tiles. The baton dropped from his hand with a metallic clatter. The fight, such as it was, ended in less than 10 seconds. Chuck knelt on one knee, keeping the man pinned, arms twisted behind his back. Ronda reached down and retrieved the baton, then the pistol, ejecting the magazine and clearing the chamber with a single, swift motion. Ebony hadn't moved. Her breath came in shallow gulps. Her fingers were still wrapped around the edge of the counter. Chuck looked up at her. "It's over." Outside, the sirens grew louder, clearer. The first set of red and blue lights painted the windows in streaks of color. Ronda walked around the counter, placed a hand gently on Ebony's shoulder. "You're safe." The girl nodded slowly. "Thank you. I didn't know if anyone would—" "You're not alone," Ronda said. "Not tonight." Chuck stood, hauling the subdued imposter to his feet. The man no longer struggled. His face was blank now, slack with the sudden, crushing realization that the power he thought he wielded had dissolved entirely. He looked like someone waking up from a nightmare only to find that it was real, and he was the monster in it. Police vehicles filled the parking lot now. 4 units, officers spilling out with weapons drawn and radios crackling. They moved with precision, professionalism, urgency, but also caution. From the outside, they didn't know what waited within. Until the door opened and Chuck calmly stepped forward with the man in custody. He handed him over without a word. The lead officer, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s with a silver stripe at his temple, holstered his weapon as soon as he recognized Chuck. "Norris?" he asked, eyebrows lifting. Chuck gave a single nod. "He's not one of yours." The officer took the imposter and turned him toward the flashing lights. "We'll see about that." Inside the store, Ebony sat on a stool behind the counter, her hands still trembling. Ronda stayed beside her, silent for a moment, then offered her a bottle of water. "Drink," she said softly. "You need it." Ebony took it with both hands. Her fingers were cold against the plastic. Outside, the man was shoved into the back of a cruiser. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He just stared at the pavement, as though the cement might offer an escape. The truth was out now. The badge had meant nothing. The uniform had meant nothing. And the power he'd thought he had had been smoke all along. The only thing real had been fear. But tonight, fear had met its match, and it had lost. The flashing red and blue lights outside the market sliced through the humid night like strobe cuts across a stage, illuminating the cracked concrete and faded signage in bursts of color. The parking lot was swarmed now with patrol cars, their engines idling, their doors open. Officers moved with purpose, some securing the perimeter, others forming entry lines at the front door, weapons drawn but cautious. Inside, however, the storm had already broken. Chuck stood just beyond the doorframe, his silhouette calm and composed against the chaos. His hand rested lightly on the shoulder of the man they had subdued, who was now handcuffed and sagging under the weight of his own failure. There was no more shouting, no more threats. Only the slow, disjointed breathing of a man who had worn power like a mask and now found himself stripped bare. The commanding officer who had approached earlier, a lean man with a graying beard and sharp eyes, gestured for his officers to lower their weapons. He took one look at the captured suspect and nodded to Chuck. "You two handled this?" he asked. Chuck gave a simple nod. He had a gun on a civilian, pretending to be one of you. "Name?" He didn't give one, but he said he was Metro Division. The officer looked the man up and down. "That uniform's wrong. That's not even the current patch." Ronda emerged from inside the store, her expression calm but tense, and moved toward the entrance. Behind her, Ebony remained seated on the stool behind the register, her hands cradling a half-empty water bottle, eyes fixed on the floor. She was trembling, though less now. Her breath came more evenly, but the color in her face was still slowly returning. "He had her pinned in with a weapon drawn," Ronda said as she joined Chuck at the doorway. "Tried to make it look like official procedure. Threats, intimidation, and he was escalating." The officer nodded, his voice low but respectful. "We've had complaints like that. Reports, unconfirmed. Some women didn't want to go on the record. You two just gave us the break we needed." Officers moved in to retrieve the imposter. Two younger patrolmen flanked him, and though he didn't resist, his posture screamed defiance. His lips curled as he was pulled away. "You don't know who I am," he snarled. "You think this is over?" Chuck didn't even blink. "You're right. It's just beginning." The man spat in the dirt, but the officers paid no mind. They escorted him to one of the cruisers and pushed him into the back seat, slamming the door shut with finality. The vehicle pulled away seconds later, leaving only the wash of rotating lights and the trailing echo of rubber tires against asphalt. Back inside the store, Ebony remained silent, watching everything with wide eyes. Her breathing had steadied, but her grip on the bottle hadn't loosened. Her lips were slightly parted, as if she still hadn't caught up with the fact that she was alive, that she had come through something, and survived. Chuck re-entered the store and walked to the counter. He didn't lean in, didn't loom or speak immediately. He just stood there for a moment, allowing his presence to settle like a calming weight. "You okay?" he asked gently. Ebony blinked, startled at first, then slowly nodded. Her voice was quiet, raw. "I think so." Ronda followed, pulling a second stool from behind the counter and sitting beside her. She didn't say anything at first either. She just sat, elbows on her knees, her breath controlled, giving the girl space to feel her way out of the fog. Outside, more officers were interviewing witnesses. A pair of customers who had arrived just after the confrontation stood near one of the cruisers, giving their accounts. They had seen the suspect in uniform, but from a distance. One said he looked nervous. The other said mean. Neither had expected what they found when they walked in. Inside, the lead officer stepped in through the automatic doors. His nameplate read Carter. He carried a notepad in one hand, a radio clipped to his shoulder. He approached Chuck and Ronda with the calm of a man who had seen worse but didn't want to anymore. "I've got a name," he said, gesturing to the rear of the store. "Eric Flasher, ex-private security. Lost his license after multiple complaints of harassment. No convictions. Somehow got his hands on an old patrol uniform and a decommissioned duty weapon. He's been using it for months." Ronda exhaled slowly. "And no one stopped him until now?" "There were reports," Carter said, but none strong enough to pursue. No footage, no willing victims. Most of them just quit their jobs and disappeared. Night workers, young women, especially women of color. He knew what he was doing. He picked the right targets. Chuck glanced at Ebony, who still hadn't spoken again. He picked the wrong place tonight. Carter looked at the two of them, eyes narrowing. That's the truth. You two, you stopped something bigger than you know. Not for credit, Ronda said. She needed help. That was enough. The officer gave a slight nod. Still, you'll both need to give statements. And we'll need the footage if this store's got any worth saving. I can show you, Ebony whispered. They turned toward her. Her voice was steadier now, though still thin. I can log into the system. I know the codes. It loops every 12 hours, but I think it's still caught tonight. Carter nodded, stepping gently behind the counter and giving her space. You take your time, miss. We'll work with whatever you have. Ebony stood with slow, careful motion. Her knees buckled slightly, but Rhonda's hand shot out, steadying her. With a grateful look, Ebony moved to the terminal beside the register and began typing. Chuck turned to Carter. What happens now? We bring him in, book him, Carter said. Then dig. See how many more stores he's hit. Try to get the other victims to come forward. But this breaks the pattern. Now we've got him with a drawn weapon, impersonating an officer, and we've got you two as witnesses. You'll make it stick? Ronda asked. Carter's jaw tightened. We're gonna try. They stood in silence for a few minutes while Ebony worked. Eventually, she found the footage and rewound to the moment the imposter entered. The screen showed him in grainy black and white, his body language confident, practiced. But the angle caught his face clearly. Carter's eyes lit up. That'll do, he said. Can we copy it? Ebony nodded. I'll burn it to a drive. As she worked, Carter looked back to Chuck and Ronda. I've seen a lot of things, but this was one wrong breath from going sideways. That girl, she could have died tonight. She didn't, Chuck said. That's what matters. Outside, the crowd was dispersing. A few curious onlookers had gathered at the edge of the lot, but the officers kept them back. Reporters hadn't arrived yet, but they would. A call like this, with a fake cop, a hostage, and two well-known names stepping in, it would travel fast. Inside, Ronda moved to help Ebony steady a shaky coffee machine. Chuck stepped behind one of the fallen racks and began setting items back onto shelves. They didn't need to be asked. They didn't expect thanks. The world didn't need another headline. It needed someone to put things back where they belonged. Carter turned toward the exit, then paused. You two sticking around? For a bit, Chuck said. She shouldn't be here alone, Ronda added. The officer nodded, then left, murmuring into his radio. The door slid closed behind him with a soft hiss, muffling the sounds of engines and radios outside. In the soft buzz of returning quiet, the market took on a new stillness, not the kind born of fear, but the aftermath of it. A moment to breathe. A moment to let the adrenaline subside. Ebony finished loading the video and handed the drive to Ronda. Here, she said, in case he says it didn't happen. Ronda took it gently. It happened, and you stopped him from doing it to someone else. I didn't stop him, Ebony said quietly. You did. Chuck glanced up from the shelf he was restocking. No, you stood your ground. You didn't give him what he wanted. That takes more strength than most people understand. Ebony looked down, unsure, but nodded slowly. The night outside rolled on. Police cruisers came and went. Reports were taken. Evidence was bagged. But inside that store, something quiet had taken root. Not just relief, Not just safety, but truth. The truth that fear could be met, and sometimes, if you were lucky, met with a first strike strong enough to end it. The scent of cheap disinfectant and spilled soda still clung to the air, mingling with the lingering metallic edge of tension. Though the imposter had been taken away and the patrol cars had begun to thin out from the parking lot, the market had not returned to normal. It couldn't. The aftershock of fear, like an invisible tremor, had left its fingerprints on every surface, on every breath. The shelves were askew, some still half empty from the scuffle, and beneath the counter, the panic button's red light continued to blink, unnoticed but insistent, a silent witness that refused to forget. Ebony sat behind the register, no longer trembling, but not quite still. Her legs were crossed at the ankles, but her back remained upright and tense. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers intertwined so tightly they'd gone pale. The water bottle lay on its side beside her, forgotten. The store had grown quieter, the outside sirens fading into background noise. Inside, the hum of electricity and the occasional thump of a refrigeration cycle were the only constants. But under it all, something heavier lingered. Truth, freshly uncovered and still settling like dust after demolition. Chuck stood near the snack aisle, straightening an overturned display with quiet focus. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. His movements were slow and methodical, a silent rhythm of order in the wake of chaos. Beside the cooler, Ronda was kneeling, gathering cans that had rolled under a shelf during the fight. Each motion was deliberate, purposeful. This was how they worked, not just in the moment of conflict, but in the aftermath too. When the punches had stopped and the real damage revealed itself not in bruises, but in what was left standing. Detective Carter returned through the sliding door, his notepad tucked under one arm, a USB drive in hand. His steps were heavier now, weighed down with knowledge. He crossed the store, nodded briefly at Chuck, then looked toward Ebony, whose eyes met his with quiet strength. "We finished running him," he said. "Eric Flasher, 43 years old. Fired from Midgard Private Security last year. A dozen complaints, half a dozen investigations. Harassment, intimidation, abuse of authority, but nothing ever stuck. Most victims refused to testify. Some just disappeared." He placed the drive gently on the counter. "But tonight changes that." Ebony didn't speak at first, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then, finally, she said, "He knew I was alone, knew my schedule. This wasn't the first time he came here." Carter nodded grimly. That's how he operated. Picked his targets carefully. Preferred night shifts, single-staffed stores, women who looked like they wouldn't fight back. His eyes flicked to Ronda, then Chuck. He miscalculated. Ronda rose from where she was crouching and crossed her arms. "He's been doing this for months." "Best guess, longer," Carter said. "We found a duffel in his car, old uniforms, expired ID cards, gear. Not just this store either. At least 5 others in a 10-mile radius. All night staff, all women. He never left bruises, never left evidence. But he left fear. That was his signature." Chuck looked up from the shelf he was resetting. "And you never caught him before." "We didn't have enough," Carter admitted. "And we didn't have anyone who could stop him in the moment." He nodded toward Ebony. "Until tonight." Ebony looked away. "I didn't stop him. I froze." "You didn't run," Ronda said firmly. "You didn't give him what he wanted. You held your ground. That's more than most." Carter leaned against the counter, folding his arms. "There's more. He had a second address listed, storage unit over on Maple. We're sending a team there now, but it's not just what he did that matters. It's what he said after. Chuck turned to face him fully. He talked? Some, Carter said. Not a confession. Not yet. But enough to know he's been using the badge to get leverage. Pretending to be a cop gave him a shield, and he hid behind it. He weaponized trust, Ronda murmured. That's the worst kind. Carter's mouth tightened. We also found a journal in his glove box. Not detailed, just names, times, notes. Your name was in it, Ebony. She blinked, her posture stiffened. Mine? Yeah, Carter's voice softened. 3 entries. First one was over a month ago. Time of your shift. No other context. Second said, nervous, compliant, potential. Third said, push harder next time, no cameras. Ebony swallowed hard, her throat tight. He was planning something worse. I think so, Carter said, and you stopped it. Ronda stepped closer and sat on the edge of the counter. He's not coming back. You understand that, right? Ebony nodded slowly, but her eyes still looked distant. It just doesn't feel real. One minute I'm ringing up soda, the next... Chuck finished stacking the final bag of chips and approached. It was real, and you survived it. For a moment, silence settled again. Not oppressive this time, but heavy with meaning. Then Carter spoke, lowering his voice. There's something else. They turned toward him, instinctively wary. There's a possibility he wasn't acting entirely alone, Carter said. We've got reason to believe he may have had someone feeding him store schedules, employee rosters. There's no way he could have known some of these places were unguarded unless he had help. Ronda narrowed her eyes. An inside source? Possibly. Could be someone in a cleaning crew, maybe someone in one of the delivery companies. Could be someone with access to shift data. We're working on it, but that makes this bigger. Chuck nodded slowly, which means he wasn't the only threat. Exactly, Carter said, and with him in custody, whoever helped him may try to run or clean up. You'll need evidence, Ronda said. Witnesses, stories that never got told. We're hoping now that someone stood up, others will follow. Ebony looked up at that. You think they will? I think courage is contagious, Carter replied, and tonight gave people a reason to believe they won't be alone if they speak. She nodded again, this time with a little more certainty. I'll testify, whatever it takes. Carter smiled slightly, a rare and tired thing. We'll be in touch. He turned to Chuck and Ronda. And thank you. I know you didn't have to do this. Most people would have walked away. We're not most people, Chuck said simply. Carter left then, radio in hand, stepping back out into the night. The door sighed shut behind him and the light dimmed slightly as the remaining patrol cars pulled away. Ebony stood and stretched, wincing slightly as the tension left her muscles. I should clean this up. You should sit, Ronda countered. Let your body catch up to your mind. But Ebony shook her head. If I don't move, I'll think too much. And if I think too much, I'll start to wonder if I imagined all of this. Chuck began restacking another shelf. You didn't. I know, she said, voice quieter, but it still feels like I might wake up any second. Ronda picked up a fallen bottle of iced tea. It's real, and you're still standing. That counts. They cleaned in silence for a while after that, not because there was nothing to say, but because sometimes silence was the best way to process something too big for words. Outside, the night carried on, unaware of the battle that had been fought and won within the narrow aisles of that modest store. But, for those who had been there, nothing would ever feel quite the same again. And for a girl who once felt invisible behind a counter, the world had finally taken notice, not because of what was done to her, but because she refused to disappear. The silence inside the store had shifted again, not the brittle, fearful silence that had haunted it earlier, nor the stunned hush that followed violence, but something softer, deeper, a silence of afterthought, of things falling slowly back into place. The shelves were mostly upright again, though crooked in parts. The floor had been swept where soda had burst open, and only a faint stickiness underfoot hinted at the chaos that had unfolded hours before. The light above the counter still flickered from the bullet hole overhead, but it no longer felt menacing. It was simply a reminder, a mark of survival. Ebony moved with more stability now. She wasn't calm, not completely, but she had found her footing again. She had changed into a fresh navy hoodie from the back room, the original one stained and wrinkled from adrenaline, sweat, and the slight spatter of broken merchandise. She moved behind the counter with slow determination, methodically rechecking the till and counting inventory that had spilled out in the confrontation. Chuck had offered to do it for her, but she had declined. "I need to finish the shift," she had said, almost apologetically. "I need to end it right." Chuck hadn't argued. He understood the ritual. In the face of chaos, restoring order wasn't about the world. It was about reclaiming the self. And for Ebony, putting things back where they belonged was the only kind of power she could hold right now. Outside, most of the patrol cars had gone. The glow of sirens had vanished from the glass storefront, leaving behind a dim, quiet parking lot and the subtle hiss of streetlights humming overhead. Only one cruiser remained, parked beneath the broken lamppost where it cast long shadows over the wet asphalt. Inside it sat Detective Carter, his face lit by the glow of a tablet screen. He returned shortly after, pushing the door open with a sigh and walking toward the counter. In his hand, he held a clipboard and a manila envelope. He looked more tired than before, but also more resolved. "We've filed initial charges," he said, setting the clipboard on the counter. "Eric Flasher is being held without bail. Too much misconduct in his file. Tonight gives the DA what they needed to push it over the edge." Ebony stood behind the counter, her arms folded. "What about the rest, the other women, the other nights?" Carter nodded. "They'll be included. We're pulling surveillance from every store he's linked to. We've already got 2 managers who came forward, said they were too scared to file formal complaints before, but after hearing what happened here tonight..." He trailed off, but Ronda stepped in. It gave them courage. Carter gave her a small, tired smile. "Yeah, exactly that." Chuck leaned against one of the cooler doors, his arms crossed. "And the accomplice?" "We don't have a name yet," Carter said, "but we traced his storage unit. Found boxes of store schedules, employee names, even logs of night deliveries. There's no way he got that without help from someone inside a network. We're looking at contract cleaning companies, security vendors, delivery services, anywhere someone could quietly leak that kind of intel." "He was organized," Ronda said. "Too precise for a lone act." Carter's face darkened. "Yeah, that's what worries us." He pulled a document from the folder and handed it to Ebony. "This is a witness statement. You're not obligated to sign anything tonight, but if you're willing, we'd like to move forward with your testimony." Ebony took the paper with steady hands. "I'll sign it. Take your time." "I've had time," she said. "Too many nights watching him linger in here, thinking I was imagining it, wondering if I was just being paranoid. Tonight proved I wasn't." Carter pulled out a second document, thinner. This is your temporary protection notice. We're assigning a unit to check in on you for the next several days. Until the case is locked down and the network, if there is one, is identified, we're not taking chances. Ebony blinked. Wait, you think I'm still in danger? Ronda stepped closer. You're not alone anymore, Ebony, but he wasn't acting in a vacuum. There's always a chance that someone connected to him might panic. Chuck added, and panic makes people stupid. Carter gave a half nod. We're not trying to scare you, but you should be aware. You've already done the hard part. Now, let us finish it. Ebony looked at the form in her hands, then signed both with slow, precise strokes. When she was done, she exhaled and looked up at them. Feels weird, she said. Putting my name on something like this, like admitting it happened, makes it more real. Ronda offered a gentle smile. It makes it count. Carter packed the signed documents back into the envelope and took a final look around the store. You'll probably get calls in the next few days. Reporters, mostly. We didn't release your name, but your photo's circulating. The one with Chuck and Ronda. It's gone viral. Ebony looked toward her phone, which lay on the counter face down. I haven't checked. I turned off notifications. That might be smart, Carter said. There's support out there, sure. But people say things when they're behind screens. Don't let that noise drown out what really happened. I won't, she said. The detective gave one last nod, then turned toward the door. He paused before stepping out. Thank you, he said. You stood up tonight. Not everyone does. And for what it's worth, you weren't supposed to be alone. Then he left. The store grew quiet again. Chuck returned to restocking a final shelf. Ronda wandered down an aisle, straightening small items with an idle grace. Ebony sat on the stool behind the counter and stared ahead for a long moment, then slowly turned her phone face up. She unlocked the screen, hesitated, and opened her photo gallery. The image she had taken before everything fell apart was still there. Her, standing between Chuck Norris and Ronda Rousey, both of them smiling politely. She looked different in the photo, less alert, more unsure of herself, like she was posing beside an idea, not two real people. The irony hit her hard now. They had just been two customers, two strangers passing through. Then they had become something else. They had become the reason she was still here. She tapped the image, stared at it, then opened her social media app. Thousands of likes, hundreds of comments, messages from strangers, news outlets, friends she hadn't heard from in years. Words like hero and brave littered the feed, along with hashtags she never imagined would follow her name. People are calling me strong, she said aloud. Ronda, halfway down the aisle, looked over her shoulder. Because you are. It doesn't feel like I was, Ebony replied. I froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. Chuck glanced up. You stayed. That's more than most. Ebony thought about that, then closed the app and set the phone down. What happens now? Now, Ronda said, you heal. You let the system do its job, and you don't let what happened tonight define who you are. Chuck added, but don't forget it either. The automatic doors opened again, and an older man in a maintenance uniform entered. He looked around at the mess, blinking at the fallen displays and scattered products. Did I miss something? Ebony smiled faintly. Little bit. The man walked slowly down the aisle, scratching the back of his head. Gonna be a long night. I've had longer, she said. Chuck chuckled and handed the man a mop bucket. We'll help. The man accepted it with confusion. You don't work here. We helped make the mess, Ronda said. We'll help clean it. Together, the four of them worked in silence. The clock above the counter ticked past 4. The sky outside remained dark, but it was the darkness before dawn. A different kind of dark. One that promised morning was coming. Ebony caught her reflection in the glass cooler door. She didn't look like the girl from the photo anymore. She looked tired, yes, but she also looked solid, present, alive in a way that had nothing to do with smiling for strangers. She stood a little taller, and she knew this night had changed her. Not because of the fear, but because of what she chose to do with it. The hour was nearing 5 when the final cruiser pulled away from the parking lot, its tires leaving faint trails across the moisture-darkened pavement. The red and blue lights that had bathed the storefront in pulsing color were gone now, replaced by the soft amber glow of weary street lamps and the fading hush of night. The city had not yet stirred from its sleep, but the market, though standing, felt different, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath in the aftermath of something they couldn't quite name. Inside, the store had returned to a rough semblance of order. The shelves weren't perfect, and a few cracked tiles near the back wall bore witness to the struggle that had unfolded hours earlier, but to someone walking in for the first time, it might have looked like a typical early morning lull. Only the bullet hole above the counter, jagged and blackened, betrayed what had occurred. That, and the presence of 2 unlikely figures still working long after their part had been done. Chuck moved with unhurried purpose, lifting a final case of bottled water and placing it neatly on a lower shelf near the refrigerators. His sleeves were rolled up now, forearms dusted with grime, and his silence was deeper than usual. Not heavy, but complete, the kind of quiet that needed no words. He didn't look tired exactly, but something older than fatigue lingered in the lines of his face, in the way his gaze lingered on the simplest of tasks. Ronda stood by the coffee station, wiping down the metal countertop with a damp cloth. The rhythmic motion had taken on a meditative quality. Her jaw was set, her focus sharp, but her shoulders had begun to loosen as the night gave way to something resembling peace. She glanced toward the window, where the first gray hints of dawn were pressing against the darkness. Behind the counter, Ebony sat with a paper cup of tea cradled between both hands. Her phone lay beside her, face down again, still buzzing from time to time with messages and mentions and shares. She hadn't checked it in over an hour. Instead, she stared at the far end of the store, where a promotional sign still hung crooked above the snack aisle, its bold font advertising Midnight Madness in garish colors that now seemed ironic, almost mocking. "I don't think I'll ever forget this night," she said quietly, not to anyone in particular. Ronda looked over her shoulder. "Some nights don't fade." Chuck said nothing, but his eyes met Ebony's and held there for a long moment. She nodded as if he'd spoken. The door opened again with a soft hiss, and a man in his 30s stepped inside, holding the hand of a small girl no older than 7. The man wore a faded baseball cap and an oversized hoodie. His daughter, in a pink coat and sneakers with blinking lights, stared wide-eyed at the inside of the store. He hesitated, clearly unsure whether he should speak. "Sorry," he said after a beat. "Didn't mean to interrupt. I saw the photo online. I wasn't sure if it was real." Ronda smiled gently. "It was." The man's eyes darted to Chuck, then back to her. "Would you mind? My daughter's a big fan of both of you." Chuck tilted his head toward the snack shelf. "Help us restock the chips, and we've got a deal." The man blinked, then laughed. He bent down with a grateful nod and began helping without hesitation, lining up crinkled bags of corn snacks and pretzels like a man determined to earn his moment. His daughter stood in front of the counter, staring up at Ebony, who offered her a small chocolate bar with a wink. "You were brave," the little girl said in a voice barely above a whisper. "My dad said you're a hero." Ebony looked down at her. "I was scared." The girl nodded solemnly. "Me too, but you stayed." When the man finished with the chips, Ronda retrieved the customer's phone and took a quick photo. Father, daughter, and two martial arts legends smiling beneath the fluorescent glow. The girl waved on their way out. Chuck raised his hand in return, and the door slid shut behind them with a whisper. The quiet returned, but it was no longer sharp. It had mellowed into something else, something earned. "I don't get it," Ebony said softly. "You stayed. You helped. You didn't even know me." Ronda leaned back against the counter, folding her arms. "We didn't need to. Most people would have walked away." Chuck's voice came low. "We never do." A long pause followed. The clock above the register ticked audibly now, each second sounding more present, more real. "What happens next?" Ebony asked. Ronda glanced at Chuck, who shrugged slightly. "We sleep," she said. "Eventually. You'll go back to wherever you came from. What about me?" "You keep living," Chuck said. "You keep standing." "And the fear?" "It'll fade," he answered. "Not all at once, not completely, but it'll lose its grip." Ebony stared down at her tea. "I used to pretend I was strong. I'd imagine I was someone else, watching you two on TV, practicing moves in the mirror." "And tonight you were strong," Ronda said. "I didn't feel like it." "You don't have to feel it for it to be true." A knock came at the glass door, soft but deliberate. Detective Carter stepped inside again, this time dressed down in a dark sweater and jeans. His badge clipped at his waist and a folder under his arm, he walked with the tired weight of someone who'd been up far too long. Yet his expression was steady, composed. "I figured you two might still be here," he said, nodding toward Chuck and Ronda. "Not done yet," Chuck said. "I brought updates," Carter replied. "Didn't feel right leaving things where we left off." He placed the folder on the counter and flipped it open, revealing still images from surveillance footage. Flasher walking into the store, drawing his weapon, the moment the gun fired, the precise second Ronda stepped forward. Then Chuck's takedown, freeze frames of reality, captured forever. "Evidence like this," Carter said, "makes it impossible to spin the story. He's done. The DA's already working on the case. We'll tie everything we've got to this night." "What about the others?" Ronda asked. Carter nodded. "We've identified 2 more victims who didn't file reports but kept notes. One of them had a recording. They're ready to testify now." "And his network?" Chuck asked. "We've made progress. His storage unit gave us a name, a former cleaning contractor with access to schedules. He's in the wind now, but we'll find him." "Anything on threats to Ebony?" Ronda's voice sharpened. "Not so far, but we're keeping a patrol close by until we're sure. You'll be safe," he said to her directly. "No one's getting near you again." Ebony's mouth quivered slightly. "And if they try?" Carter's tone firmed. "Then they'll learn what he did." He closed the folder and looked back at Chuck and Ronda. "For what it's worth, this won't be forgotten. You changed something tonight." "We didn't come for change," Chuck said. "Just water." "Still," Carter said, "you gave people something real. That matters." He nodded once more, then left. The door closed gently behind him, and the lights of his car faded into the distance. Dawn crept through the edges of the sky outside. The inky black had softened to deep blue, and a bird somewhere beyond the alley gave a tentative chirp as if testing the morning. The automatic lights in the market flickered again, transitioning from overnight mode to daytime cycle. Ebony stood up, her tea now gone cold. "Will you come back?" she asked. Chuck smiled faintly. "Maybe." "Next time," Ronda added, "we'll just buy the water." They gathered their things slowly. There was no rush now. The danger had passed, the story already told. But before leaving, Chuck paused beside the counter and looked up once more at the bullet hole in the ceiling. A single flake of plaster drifted down, landing silently on the floor. "You'll want to get that patched," he said. Ebony looked up with him, her voice soft but steady. "I might leave it, just for a while, so I don't forget." He nodded once, then turned. As they stepped through the doors and into the early morning air, Ebony called after them, "Take care of yourselves." Chuck looked back over his shoulder. "You too, and move that panic button closer." She laughed, this time genuinely without fear. "I will." The doors closed behind them with a soft sigh, and the two walked across the empty lot. Their SUV sat alone under the paling sky. Chuck opened the driver's door and climbed in. Ronda slid into the passenger seat. They sat for a moment in silence. "So," Ronda said eventually, "pancakes?" Chuck started the engine. "Pancakes." The vehicle rolled slowly down the street, merging with the quiet rhythm of a city beginning to stir. Behind them, the market faded from view, just another store on just another block, now part of a story that few would ever fully know. But inside, Ebony stood behind her counter, staring at the door that had closed behind two strangers who changed everything. The buzz of her phone resumed, but she ignored it. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was here, and she would never be invisible again. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more. Don't forget to check out our other videos, and share this one with someone who needs to see it.